year ago, Russians were so sure they would take Kiev in 3 days, they even packed their parade uniform. However, something went wrong, and their march of glory ended in a small and quiet Kiev satellite town, a few miles away from the capital. Reporting from Gostomel airport, which is only 10 kilometers away from Kiev. This is the place where the actual full-scale invasion has started a year ago. It started with a massive air raid by Russians. They tried to create an air corridor from Russia to Ukraine so they can bring as much heavy weapon and personnel that they needed. Once a bustling international cargo airport, the site is now a graveyard of burned cargo planes, Russian vehicles and helicopters. Even the world's largest airplane Mriya lies in ruins. On February 24th, only a small group of Ukrainian officers from the National Guard remained, as there were no other military forces present.
This area was only defended by mostly conscripts. Young guys, 18, 20 years old, staff officers, accountants, military psychologists, press service, and military firefighters. Eventually, we reported to our commander that we're running out of ammo. He ordered to move out to save the lives of our personnel. And he ordered our howitzers, because we had 2 howitzers here located nearby, to strike the runway.
This decision was crucial, as 18 Russian Il-76 aircraft were already in the air, carrying personnel and heavy weapons intended for an attack on Kyiv. However, they were diverted to land in Homel, Belarus, and had to make their way in by land through the Belarusian border.
In the beginning it was really peaceful and safe, but suddenly, like in 1 or 2 days, everything has changed. It appeared that big column of tanks were near Makariv, and we heard all of this, and then just shelling started, electricity disappeared, internet disappeared.
After the first explosions were heard in Kiev, a lot of city's residents decided to flee to smaller towns around the capital, believing it to be a safer option. But in the days that followed, the lives of these people turned into hell. After the failure of the paratroopers in Gostomel, thousands of Russian vehicles began to move toward Kiev through small satellite towns.
Actually, there was a moment when I went out from a building, and I was looking in the sky, and I actually saw a face of the pilot. He was so low, really.
The city of Irpin is exactly where the Russian offensive towards Kiev was stopped. Just 1 year ago, the nastiest street fights took place here. And when we look at the city now, we see how life has returned. But still, the ruins around us will always remind of what has happened. 1 year ago, on 10th of March, I was on assignment in the city of Irpin. My colleagues and I met a family that was hiding in a basement in the eastern part of the city. Despite the situation in Irpin getting worse, they were still indecisive about leaving their home.
It seems funny now, but in fact, when you arrived just that day, we were already on edge. It was already getting scary, every day worse and worse, worse and worse. We can laugh about it now and smile, but in fact then, those days were.
After we met, we convinced Irina to evacuate to Kyiv the next day along with her family members, including her little daughter. But besides having to leave her home, she had to leave her uncle Sasha in Irpin. At that point, part of the city was already occupied by Russian forces.
How are you after your injury? I'm okay. Feels like nothing ever happened.
Sasha is one of the residents who never left Irpin. He witnessed heavy shelling in the city and was wounded by an explosion near a neighbor's house. Shrapnel hit his shoulder, but thankfully he recovered.
Usually, when a shell is launched, you can hear it whistle, but this one was silent. The firewood got scattered all over the place, and I was hit by a fragment. The firewood saved me, otherwise I'd be fucking dead.
Since the 5th of March, the southwest of Irpin was captured by Russians, but the northeast remained under Ukrainian control. Irina and her family had to leave the city through the destroyed Romanivka bridge. This bridge became a symbol of the horror that Russia brought to the Ukrainian lands. While thousands of civilians crossed the river via makeshift ferry, leaving their beloved homes, hundreds of soldiers went in to protect their homeland. Now a brand new bridge is being built, but the destroyed one is still on display, like a reminder of the past.
My first memory is of burning Irpin, suburb in flames. The complete destruction of the bridge, a sea of cars, and dozens of terrified eyes that had to flee with no idea of what's going on.
Volodymyr and Denis are soldiers of Karpatska Sich, the volunteer military unit that defended the capital from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. In the city of Irpin, they held positions just a few kilometers away from the Russian invaders.
Here by Stoyanka, there was a horde of soldiers, and we were standing right here by these buildings. And when we entered from here, everything inside was in smoke. I remember everything was black, everything was smoking. You look at it and think, fuck, how can it be real?
Although the unit has military experience spanning back to the beginning of Russo-Ukrainian War in 2014, most of the fighters who took arms in 2022 were regular civilians. And this was something that the Russian forces were never expecting.
I think that 70% of the victory here in the Kiev region was possible thanks to volunteer battalions and the Territorial Defense Force. These are ordinary people who were handed their weapons from trucks and went on to fight to defend their city, their state, their families, children and women. This is a huge advantage, an advantage that the enemy could never have.
The Russians were unable to take Irpin by force, so instead they poured their rage onto the civilian population. After the liberation of yet another Kiev satellite, Bucha, the whole civilized world realized that the devil is not somewhere out of sight, but walking on actual Ukrainian land. Although life in here is returning to normal, this place will always remind us of the genocide committed by the Russian regime against the Ukrainian nation. While the death toll in all liberated areas of the Kiev region stands at 1,137, Bucha alone accounts for 461.
These are mostly ordinary people. We have a retail worker. We know that she went to work that day and was killed. She was in uniform. We have a policeman. We know that he was tortured. His police badge was left on him.
Yevgen Spirin is originally from Luhansk and previously worked there in a morgue. Following the liberation of Bucha, he volunteered to participate in the exhumation process. He and his team conducted their own investigation to learn more about the victims of the Bucha massacre.
The most important case for me is Margarita. This is a woman who fled with her 3 kids in a car that had children written on it in very large letters, and they hit her with a tank. She was burned alive with her children right there in the car. After some time, 3 or 4 days, a man who lived nearby got so fed up, not even fed up, but more like ashamed and heartbroken that they were just left like that in the open, that he decided to bury the family himself, not just in a mass grave, but in a separate one.
It's very difficult to imagine that just a year ago this street was just like hell on earth. It was filled with heavy Russian machinery that was burned to the ground by Ukrainian Armed Forces, and also unfortunately with the bodies of dead civilians, innocent people who lived there before. But now with the help of Ukrainian partners, we see it's a huge construction process, and I guess very soon it will be livable again.
For many residents of the Kiev region, the past year has been the most frightening of their lives. They experienced events that were unimaginable in the 21st century. The liberation of the Kiev region marked the Ukrainian army's first victory, giving hope to many that Ukraine will end this war with victory.